She turned my family against me. My mother-in-law stole my child. I left with nothing, no money, no daughter. They said I'd never survive. Until one day everything changed. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. The first time Renee Calder noticed something wrong. She was standing in her own kitchen, holding a dish towel that still smelled like lavender detergent, watching her mother-in-law rearrange the contents of her refrigerator. "You keep the milk too close to the door," Judith said without looking up. Her voice was pleasant, conversational even. "It spoils faster that way. I read an article." Renee's fingers tightened on the towel. She wanted to say that she'd kept milk in that exact spot for 3 years without issue, that this was her home, her refrigerator, her milk. Instead, she smiled and said nothing, because that's what you did when your husband's mother drove 40 minutes on a Sunday afternoon to help watch your daughter. Judith wore a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than Renee's weekly grocery budget. Her nails were manicured, her silver hair styled in a way that suggested regular salon visits. She moved through Renee's modest kitchen like she was conducting an inspection, which Renee was beginning to realize she probably was. "Where's Evan?" Renee asked, glancing toward the living room where 2-year-old Lila was stacking blocks with the concentrated focus only toddlers possessed. "Taking a call from work." Judith closed the refrigerator door with a soft click. "He works so hard." "You both do." There it was, that slight emphasis on both, as if Renee's warehouse shifts were somehow comparable to Evan's office job with his family's logistics company, as if the 12-hour days Renee spent on her feet, loading inventory and managing shipments, were just a hobby she could quit whenever she wanted. "Someone has to pay the bills," Renee said, keeping her tone light. Judith turned then, her blue eyes, the same shade as Evan's, settling on Renee with an expression that wasn't quite concern, but wasn't quite criticism either. It lived somewhere in the uncomfortable space between. "Of course. I just worry you're spreading yourself too thin. Lila needs consistency. Children thrive on routine." Renee had heard this before. Different words, same message. She was doing something wrong. She was failing in ways she couldn't quite name, but Judith could see them clearly. "She has routine," Renee said. "Daycare 4 days a week. Home with me on Fridays and weekends. She's happy." "Oh, I know she's happy." Judith's smile was warm, genuine even. "You're a good mother, Renee. I've never doubted that. I just think—" She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "I just think you could use more support. Real support." Before Renee could respond, Lila squealed from the living room. A block tower had fallen. Evan's voice drifted in, low and soothing, rebuilding it with her. "He's wonderful with her," Judith said, watching through the doorway. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, natural. Renee set down the dish towel. Her shift started at 6 the next morning, which meant she needed to prep Lila's lunch, lay out clothes, and get to bed by 10 if she wanted 5 hours of sleep. The list of things she needed to do stretched out in her mind like a road with no end. "I should start dinner," she said. "Let me help." Judith was already moving toward the cabinets, opening doors, examining contents. "Do you have garlic?" "Fresh garlic, not the jarred kind." Renee closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, Judith was looking at her with that expression again, that mixture of concern and judgment that made Renee feel like she was failing a test she hadn't known she was taking. "You look exhausted," Judith said softly. "Why don't you go lie down? I'll handle dinner. Evan and I can manage." It was an offer, a generous one even, but something about it made Renee's stomach tighten. "I'm fine," she said. Judith didn't argue. She just smiled, nodded, and started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator she'd just reorganized. Renee stood there for another moment, feeling like a guest in her own kitchen, before walking into the living room to sit on the floor beside her daughter. Lila immediately crawled into her lap, warm and solid and smelling like apple juice and baby shampoo. Evan glanced up from his phone, smiled briefly, then went back to scrolling. His thumb moved across the screen in steady swipes, his attention somewhere else entirely. "Mama," Lila said, patting Renee's cheek with sticky fingers. "Block." "Yeah, baby. Let's build." From the kitchen came the sound of Judith humming, pots clanging softly, water running. The sound of someone at home. Renee held her daughter tighter. The thing about Judith Calder was that she never arrived unannounced. She texted first, always polite, always asking if it was okay to visit. Renee never said no, because saying no to someone offering help felt ungrateful. Besides, Evan would just ask why she was being difficult. 3 weeks after the refrigerator incident, Judith started showing up twice a week instead of once. Then 3 times. Then she had a key which Evan had given her just in case of emergencies. Renee came home from a Tuesday shift to find Judith folding laundry on the couch, Lila playing quietly on a blanket nearby. "You're home," Judith said, looking up with a smile. "How was work?" "Fine." Renee dropped her bag by the door. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, and all she wanted was to shower and collapse. "Where's Evan?" "Jim. He mentioned you have that parent-teacher conference at daycare tomorrow morning." Renee frowned. Parent-teacher conference? For Lila. Judith folded a tiny pink shirt with practice precision. "They called this afternoon. I took a message. They called here." "Well, your cell went to voicemail. They tried the home line." Judith's tone was perfectly reasonable, perfectly innocent. "I told them you'd be there at 9. That works, doesn't it?" Renee pulled out her phone. 2 missed calls from an unknown number. She'd been on the warehouse floor in a dead zone where signals barely reached. She checked her messages. Nothing. "What did they want to talk about?" she asked. "They didn't say, just that they wanted to check in." Judith set down the folded shirt and picked up another. "I'm sure it's routine. Although..." Renee waited. The silence stretched. "Although what?" "Well, I have noticed Lila seems a bit behind in her speech." Judith's voice was gentle, concerned. "My friend's granddaughter is the same age, and she's using full sentences now. Lila mostly does single words." Heat crawled up Renee's neck. Every child develops at their own pace. Of course. Judith nodded quickly. "I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying maybe the daycare noticed too. It might be worth getting her evaluated. Early intervention can make such a difference." Renee's jaw clenched. Lila was fine. She babbled constantly, pointed at everything, understood instructions. She was 2. She was exactly where she needed to be. But doubt crept in anyway, cold and unwelcome. "I'll talk to them," Renee said. "Good." Judith smiled. "You're a good mother, Renee. You care. That's what matters." Lila crawled over, reaching for Renee with both arms. Renee scooped her up, buried her face in her daughter's hair, and tried to ignore the feeling that she was being measured against a standard she'd never agreed to. Later that night, when Evan came home smelling like sweat and protein shakes, Renee mentioned the conference. "Oh, yeah," he said, scrolling through his phone while eating cold chicken from the fridge. "Mom told me. You're going, right?" "You could come too." "Can't. Early meeting." He didn't look up. "Mom offered to go with you if you want backup." "I don't need backup." "Okay." He shrugged, just trying to help. Renee stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him eat and scroll. Eat and scroll, like she wasn't even there. Like the conference, the missed calls, the reorganized refrigerator, were all just minor details he didn't need to think about. "When did you give your mom a key?" she asked. "Last month." "Why?" "You didn't ask me." Evan finally looked up, his expression genuinely confused. "Why would I need to ask? She's my mom." What if something happened and we needed someone to get in? We have neighbors, friends, Mom's family. He said it like that settled everything. Why are you making this weird? Renee didn't answer. She walked upstairs, ran the shower hot enough to turn her skin pink, and stood under the spray until the water ran cold. The daycare conference was nothing. A routine check-in. Lila was doing great, hitting all her milestones, social and engaged. The teacher seemed confused when Renee asked about speech concerns. Who told you that? She asked, flipping through notes. Lila's verbal skills are age-appropriate. She's actually ahead in some areas. Renee felt something loosen in her chest, then immediately tighten again. Judith had been wrong. Or not wrong, lying. No, not lying either. Just concerned. Overly concerned. Incorrectly concerned. She texted Evan the good news. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji. She didn't text Judith. But Judith called anyway, later that evening, asking how it went. Renee kept her voice neutral as she explained that everything was fine, that Lila was exactly where she needed to be. Oh, wonderful, Judith said, and she sounded genuinely relieved. I'm so glad. I was worried I'd upset you by mentioning it. I just want what's best for her, you know? For all of you. I know, Renee said, because what else could she say? After she hung up, she stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes that were already clean, scrubbing the same plate in circles while her mind spun. Judith meant well. Judith loved Lila. Judith was just trying to help. These were the things Renee told herself. These were the things that were supposed to matter. But underneath it all was something else. A whisper that grew louder with each passing week. Judith was building a case. Not in any official sense. Not with lawyers or courts. Just in conversations. In casual comments made to Evan, to neighbors, to other family members. Renee works so much. She's always so tired. I worry about her. Renee heard these comments secondhand, filtered through other people's sympathetic nods and concerned frowns. They came back to her in fragments, pieces of a narrative she hadn't written but was somehow starring in. The narrative said she was struggling. The narrative said she was overwhelmed. The narrative said she needed help. And slowly, quietly, that narrative became truth simply by being repeated often enough. It happened on a Friday in October. Renee had taken the day off work, used a precious personal day, so she could take Lila to the pumpkin patch 30 minutes outside Millstone Creek. They'd been planning it for weeks. Lila had been talking about pumpkins nonstop, calling them punkin, in that way that made Renee's heart physically ache with love. She'd packed snacks, water, sunscreen. She'd charged her camera. She'd planned every detail. When she came downstairs that morning, Lila was gone. The high chair sat empty, still sticky with yesterday's oatmeal. The diaper bag that usually hung by the door was missing. Evan stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee, looking at his phone. "Where's Lila?" Renee asked. "Mom picked her up about an hour ago." He took a sip, eyes still on the screen. "They're going to the Children's Museum in Indianapolis." Renee's brain stuttered. "What?" "The Children's Museum. Mom's been wanting to take her. I figured since you were off today, you could use the break. I was taking her to the pumpkin patch." Evan looked up then, his expression shifting from distracted to confused. "You didn't mention that." "Yes, I did. Last week. And the week before. I told you I'd taken the day off specifically for this." "I don't remember that." He set down his mug, defensive now. "Why didn't you remind me this morning?" "Because I was sleeping. Because I thought my daughter would be in her crib when I woke up, not gone to Indianapolis with your mother." "Don't do that." Evan's voice got that edge it always got when Renee pushed back on anything involving Judith. "Don't make this about Mom. She's helping. She's always helping. All you do lately is complain about her." Renee felt her hands start to shake. She pressed them flat against the counter. "Call her. Tell her to bring Lila back. Are you serious right now? Evan, call her. He stared at her for a long moment, then picked up his phone. The call went straight to voicemail. She's probably already there, he said. Reception's bad on the highway. Look, just relax. They'll be back tonight. You can take Lila to the pumpkin patch tomorrow. I work tomorrow. Sunday then. Renee closed her eyes. Sunday. The pumpkin patch would be crowded. The weather was supposed to turn. Lila would be exhausted from today's trip. Everything would be different, wrong, not what she'd planned. But more than that, more than the ruined plans or the wasted personal day, was the realization that her husband had given away her daughter for the day without asking, without thinking it was strange, without questioning whether he had the right to make that choice alone. Next time, Renee said quietly, opening her eyes, ask me first. There's nothing to ask about. Mom taking Lila for a few hours isn't a federal case. Evan grabbed his coffee and walked toward the living room. I'm going to watch the game. Try to enjoy your day off. Renee stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty high chair, and felt the ground shift under her feet. Judith brought Lila back at 8 that night. The house was dark except for the lamp Renee had left on in the living room, where she'd been sitting for the past 3 hours waiting. She heard the car first, then Judith's voice, bright and cheerful. Here we are. Say bye-bye to Grandma. Renee opened the door before they reached the porch. Lila was asleep in Judith's arms, her head resting on Judith's shoulder, one small hand curled into Judith's expensive sweater. She had the most wonderful time, Judith whispered, stepping inside. The museum was incredible. She loved the dinosaur exhibit, and we had ice cream. Hope that's okay. Renee held out her arms. Judith hesitated for just a fraction of a second before transferring Lila over. The toddler stirred but didn't wake, her body heavy and warm with exhaustion. Thank you for bringing her back, Renee said. Her voice came out flat, emotionless. Of course. Judith smoothed her sweater where Lila's hand had wrinkled it. We had such a good day. She's such a sweet girl. I was thinking next weekend we could. No. Judith blinked. I'm sorry. Next weekend she stays home. With me. Silence stretched between them, taut and uncomfortable. Judith's expression shifted, hardened just slightly around the edges. Renee, I was just offering to help. You don't need to be hostile. I'm not being hostile. I'm being clear. About what? About boundaries. Renee adjusted her hold on Lila, who was getting heavier by the second. You can't just take her whenever you want. I'm her mother. And I'm her grandmother. Judith's voice remained perfectly calm, but something had changed in her eyes. Something cold. I would never try to replace you, Renee. I'm simply trying to support this family. Support you. But if you don't want my help, all you have to do is say so. It was a trap. Renee could feel it. Saying she didn't want help would make her ungrateful. Saying she did want help would give Judith permission to continue exactly as she'd been doing. I appreciate your help, Renee said carefully, but I need you to coordinate with me before making plans with Lila. That's all I'm asking. Judith studied her for a long moment, then smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Of course. I understand completely. I'll talk to Evan about it. She left without saying goodbye. Renee carried Lila upstairs, changed her into pajamas without waking her, and laid her in the crib. Lila's face was peaceful, her breath coming in soft, even puffs. She smelled like museum gift shop and vanilla ice cream and someone else's day. Renee stood there watching her daughter sleep until Evan came upstairs and said, Mom said you were rude to her. I wasn't rude. She was crying on the phone, Renee. Renee turned to look at her husband. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light, his expression disappointed. Not angry, disappointed, which somehow felt worse. She took our daughter without asking me, Renee said. She ruined plans I'd made. She did exactly what I've been trying to tell you about for months now. She's slowly taking over our lives, and you refuse to see it. What I see, Evan said slowly, is my mother trying to help and my wife acting paranoid. She loves Lila. She loves us. Why is that threatening to you? Because it's not about love. It's about control. Evan shook his head. You're being crazy right now. You know that. The word hung in the air between them. Crazy. Not upset. Not overwhelmed. Crazy. Get out, Renee said quietly. This is my room, too. Then I'll leave. She walked past him, down the stairs, grabbed her coat and keys. She drove to a gas station, parked under the fluorescent lights, and sat in her car until her hands stopped shaking. When she came back 2 hours later, Evan was asleep in their bed. She slept on the couch. In the morning, he acted like nothing had happened. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It happened in degrees, small enough that each individual moment seemed manageable, reasonable even. It was only when Renee looked back later that she could see the pattern, the slow constriction of a trap closing. Sunday dinner at Judith's house had always been a standing invitation. Now it became an expectation. Evan packed up Lila's things every weekend without consulting Renee, who often worked Saturday shifts and came home to an empty house. They're family, Evan said whenever Renee protested. What's the problem? The problem was that Lila started crying when Renee tried to take her to the grocery store alone. The problem was that Lila's clothes started coming back from Judith's house in different outfits than she'd left in, nicer clothes, expensive brands that Judith had bought without asking. The problem was that Judith knew Lila's shoe size, her favorite foods, her nap schedule better than Renee did anymore. The problem was that Renee was becoming a stranger in her daughter's life. She asked for you yesterday, Evan mentioned one Tuesday evening, scrolling through his phone while Renee cooked dinner, when Mom was putting her down for a nap. Renee's throat tightened, and Mom sang to her. She calmed right down. He said it casually like it was good news, like it wasn't breaking Renee's heart. She wanted to scream. Instead, she stirred pasta sauce and said nothing. In November, Judith started mentioning therapy. I've been reading about maternal stress, she said during one Sunday dinner, while Evan and his father discussed football scores in the next room. There are wonderful therapists in Indianapolis who specialize in helping new mothers cope with. Lila's too, Renee interrupted. I'm not a new mother. Of course not. I just meant, well, you seem so tense lately, so defensive. I thought talking to someone might help. Judith's expression was all concern, all love. There's no shame in asking for help, Renee. But there was. That was the thing Renee was beginning to understand. In Judith's world, needing help meant admitting weakness. And weakness meant giving up control. I'm fine, Renee said. Are you? Judith leaned forward, lowering her voice. Because Evan's worried. He mentioned you've been sleeping on the couch, that you've been snapping at him, that you accused him of, what was it? Choosing me over you. Heat flooded Renee's face. Those had been private conversations, arguments that happened behind closed doors. Evan had shared them with his mother, like they were casual anecdotes, like Renee's pain was just information to be passed along. I'm going to check on Lila, Renee said, standing abruptly. She found her daughter in the playroom, surrounded by toys Renee couldn't afford and books Judith had already read to her a dozen times. Lila barely looked up when Renee entered. Pumpkin, Renee said softly, kneeling beside her. Want to go home? No. Lila pushed a toy truck across the carpet. Stay here. We can play at home. With your toys. These toys. Lila's voice was firm, certain. She was 2 years old and already knew where she wanted to be. Renee sat back on her heels, something cold settling in her chest. This room, with its perfect organization and expensive toys, was becoming more home to Lila than their actual house. Judith's arms were becoming more familiar than Renee's, and there was nothing Renee could do to stop it. The bank account disappeared on a Wednesday. Renee tried to buy gas on her way to work, and her card declined. She tried again. Declined. A third time. Declined. She called the bank from the gas station parking lot. Her warehouse shift starting in 20 minutes. "I'm showing this account was closed," the representative said after a long hold. "Looks like it happened yesterday afternoon." Both account holders would have needed to authorize the closure. "Both. I didn't authorize anything." "Let me check. Yes, we have signatures from both you and Evan Calder on file." "That's not possible. I never signed anything." Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "Ma'am, I'm showing the documentation right here. If there's been fraud—" "There hasn't been." Renee closed her eyes, understanding sinking in like stones. "Thank you." She called Evan. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She texted, "Where's our money?" The response came 5 minutes later. "Call you after my meeting." Renee sat in her car, watching other people pump gas, pay, and drive away. Her fuel gauge was below a quarter tank. She had $17 cash in her wallet. Her shift started in 8 minutes, and she was 30 miles from home. She called her coworker, borrowed $20, and promised to pay him back Friday. She made it to work with 2 minutes to spare and spent the next 12 hours moving boxes while her mind spun in circles. Evan finally called at 8 that night. "The account needed reorganizing," he said, his voice tired. "Mom and I opened a new one that makes more sense for our finances. Better interest rates. I'll add you this weekend." "You closed our joint account without telling me." "I'm telling you now." "I had no money for gas, Evan. I had to borrow from a coworker. Do you understand how humiliating that was?" "I didn't think about it. I'm sorry. I'll transfer you some money tonight." "From the account I don't have access to?" "Renee." He sighed, long and exasperated. "Why are you making this such a big deal? It's just money. It's not like I'm trying to hurt you." "Then what are you trying to do?" "I'm trying to make sure our finances are handled properly. Mom helped me set everything up. She knows about this stuff. She used to do accounting for Dad's business." "I don't want your mother handling our money." "Then maybe you should have paid more attention to it. We were getting hit with fees every month because you'd forget to track your spending. This way, everything's organized, managed properly." Renee pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. She was still in the warehouse parking lot, the building dark behind her. She'd forgotten to track spending twice in the past year, small overdrafts that had cost them maybe $40 total. Evan had lectured her both times about being more responsible. Now he'd locked her out of their money completely and called it organization. "Add me to the account," she said quietly. "Tonight. I'll handle it this weekend. Promise." "Evan." "I have to go. Mom's calling." "Love you." He hung up. The weekend came and went. Evan didn't add her to the account. When she brought it up Sunday morning, he said he'd forgotten. He'd been busy. He'd do it next week. Next week became the week after. Then the week after that. Renee started keeping cash hidden in her car, in her locker at work, in a small box under the bathroom sink. She cashed her paychecks instead of depositing them. She bought groceries with money orders from the gas station, paid bills with cash at the bank. She felt like a stranger in her own life, moving through her own house with borrowed permission. Millstone Creek was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Renee had grown up 3 counties over, moved here when she married Evan. The Calders were a known family, owned businesses, sat on the town council, donated to the library. When Renee first arrived, people were welcoming enough. Distant but welcoming. Now they were just distant. It started with small things. The woman at the post office who used to chat about her grandkids suddenly had nothing to say. The cashier at the grocery store who made eye contact with everyone else but looked through Renee like she was invisible. Then it was the daycare. We need to talk about Lila's attendance, the director said, calling Renee into her office during pickup one Thursday. She's missed several days this month. Renee frowned. She's been here every day I've worked. According to our records, she was absent last Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's not, Renee stopped. Thought. Last week, Evan had been off work. He'd said he was keeping Lila home, that they'd have father-daughter time. She was home with her dad. We require notification for absences. We've tried calling, but I never got any calls. The director pulled up a log on her computer. We've called this number 4 times in the past month. She read off the digits. It was Renee's cell phone. The calls should have come through. Let me see. Renee pulled out her phone, checked her call history. Nothing from the daycare. Not one call. She checked her blocked numbers. There it was. The daycare's number blocked a month ago. She hadn't done it, which meant, I'll fix this, Renee said, unblocking the number with shaking fingers. I don't know how that happened. There's something else. The director's voice gentled. We've had concerns raised about Lila's care at home. Nothing concrete, just observations. We're required to follow up when we receive reports. Renee's blood went cold. What kind of reports? I can't share details, but if there are challenges you're facing, stress, financial difficulties, anything, we have resources. People who can help. Who made the report? I can't tell you that. But Renee knew. Of course she knew. She picked up Lila, who was finger painting with 3 other children, her face smeared with blue and yellow paint. Happy, oblivious, safe. She's fine, Renee told the director. We're fine. But walking to her car, Lila's hand sticky in hers, Renee felt the walls closing in. Judith wasn't just taking her daughter. She was dismantling Renee's entire life, piece by piece, and calling it concern. That night, Renee tried talking to Evan. Really talking, not arguing. She sat him down after Lila was asleep and explained everything. The blocked calls, the bank account, the daycare's concerns, the way his mother was building a narrative that painted Renee as unstable. He listened. She thought he was finally hearing her. Then he said, maybe she has a point. Renee went still. What? Not about everything. But you have been acting strange. Paranoid. You think Mom's out to get you, but she's just trying to help. Maybe you do need to talk to someone. A therapist or... I don't need a therapist. I need my husband to believe me. I do believe you, but his eyes said otherwise. I just think you're stressed. Overreacting to things that aren't actually problems. Mom blocked a number on your phone by accident, and suddenly it's this huge conspiracy. She didn't do it by accident. How do you know that? Because I know your mother. Evan stood up, ran his hands through his hair. You're doing it again, making her the villain. She loves you, Renee. She loves Lila. Why can't you just accept that? Because love without boundaries wasn't love. It was possession. But Renee didn't say that. She was learning that some arguments couldn't be won with words. December came. The house felt colder, even though the heat was on. Renee caught a winter virus that settled in her chest, made her cough through her shifts. She should have taken time off, but she'd already used most of her sick days, and the warehouse was brutal about attendance during the holiday rush. One Friday, she came home shaking with fever to find Lila gone. Again. Mom picked her up, Evan said. He was packing a bag, clothes, toiletries, his laptop. We thought it'd be better if Lila stayed there this weekend. So you can rest. Recover. Renee leaned against the doorframe, dizzy. Or your mother? Does it matter? You're sick. She's helping. Where are you going? Mom's. Just for the weekend. He zipped the bag, wouldn't meet her eyes. You need space to get better. Lila needs to be away from the germs. I'm her mother. And you're sick. He finally looked at her then, his expression somewhere between pity and frustration. Just rest, okay? We'll be back Sunday night. He left. Renee stood in the empty house, listening to the furnace kick on, the radiators tick. Her chest hurt, her head pounded. But worse than any physical pain was the realization that her husband had just chosen his mother's house over their home, over her. She slept for 16 hours. When she woke, she checked her phone. No messages from Evan. No photos of Lila. Nothing. She called. Voicemail. She called Judith's house. No answer. Sunday night came. Evan and Lila didn't come back. Monday morning, Renee called the warehouse, told them she was still sick, needed another day. Then she drove to Judith's house, her vision still slightly blurred with fever, her cough rattling in her chest. Judith answered the door in a cashmere robe, coffee cup in hand. "Renee, what a surprise. Where's my daughter?" "Sleeping. It's 7 in the morning." Judith didn't step aside to let her in. "Shouldn't you be resting? You look terrible." "I want Lila." "She's fine here. Better here, really. Away from your germs." Evan agreed it was the right choice. "For the weekend. It's Monday." "Is it?" Judith smiled. "We've been having such a nice time I lost track." "Don't worry." Evan already called her daycare. "She's excused for the week." The world tilted. Renee grabbed the doorframe. "The week?" "Just until you're fully recovered. We can't risk her getting sick. Young children are so vulnerable." Judith took a sip of coffee, her blue eyes sharp over the rim. "This is what's best, Renee. Deep down, I think you know that." "She's my daughter." "And I'm her grandmother. We're family. Family helps each other." Renee felt her hands curl into fists. "If you don't bring her home right now, I'll call the police." "And tell them what?" "That I'm watching my granddaughter while her mother recovers from the flu? That her father approved this arrangement." Judith's voice remained perfectly calm. "They'll tell you this is a family matter. They'll suggest you work it out with your husband, which is exactly what you should do." She closed the door. Renee stood on the porch, shaking from fever, from rage, from the horrible understanding that Judith was right. The police wouldn't care about this. It wasn't kidnapping. It was a grandmother helping out. It was a family arrangement. It was Renee losing her daughter one day at a time, and no one seeing it as the theft it really was. She drove home, called Evan 12 times. He finally answered at 3 in the afternoon. "You need to bring Lila home," Renee said. "No preamble. No small talk. She's fine where she is." "Evan, please. I'm asking you. Bring our daughter home. Mom thinks." "I don't care what your mother thinks. I care what you think. Are you my husband or hers?" Silence stretched between them. Renee counted her heartbeats, waiting. "I'll bring her home this weekend," Evan finally said. "After you're completely better." "That's not good enough." "It's what's happening." His voice hardened. "You need to understand something, Renee. This isn't about you anymore. This is about what's best for Lila. And right now, what's best for her is being somewhere stable, somewhere consistent, somewhere that isn't falling apart. Our home isn't falling apart. Isn't it?" He laughed, bitter and tired. "You're sick all the time. You work constantly. You're paranoid about my mother. You pick fights over nothing. Do you ever stop and think about how Lila sees all this? How it affects her?" Renee couldn't breathe. "You think I'm a bad mother. I think you're struggling. And I think Mom's right that maybe Lila needs more stability than you can give her right now." The words landed like physical blows. Renee pressed her hand to her chest, felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "If you don't bring her home," she said quietly, "I'll file for custody." "With what lawyer? What money?" Evan's voice was cold now, factual. "You can barely afford gas, Renee. You think you can afford a custody battle." He hung up. Renee stood in her kitchen, the kitchen Judith had reorganized, the kitchen where she no longer knew where anything was, and understood that she'd already lost. Not permanently, not legally, but practically, actually, in all the ways that mattered in daily life. Her daughter was gone, and her husband had helped take her. Saturday night arrived without Lila's return. Then Sunday, Monday morning, Renee called in sick to work again and drove back to Judith's house. This time, Evan answered the door. He was in sweatpants and a t-shirt, holding a coffee mug that Renee recognized from their own kitchen. "She's still not ready to come home," he said before Renee could speak. "That's not your decision to make alone." "Yes, it is. I'm her father. And I'm her mother." "Then act like it." The words came out sharp, angry. "Stop showing up here making scenes. Stop calling constantly. You're stressing everyone out, including Lila. I haven't even talked to Lila, because you're not stable right now." Evan stepped outside, pulled the door, closed behind him, lowering his voice. "Look, Mom and I have been talking. We think maybe you should see someone, a therapist. Get some help with whatever you're going through. Anger management, maybe. Or stress counseling. Something." Renee stared at him. This man she'd married 6 years ago, who'd told her he loved her independence, her strength, her refusal to back down. Now he stood on his mother's porch, in clothes she'd washed, drinking coffee she'd bought, telling Renee she needed to be fixed. "When did you move in here?" she asked. "I didn't move in. I'm just staying for a while." "How long is a while?" He shrugged. "Until things calm down." "Things won't calm down until you bring my daughter home." "She is home." The words hung in the cold morning air. Mom's enrolled her in a better daycare, one that focuses on early development. She starts next week. Renee's vision tunneled. "You can't do that without my permission." "I just did." Evan finished his coffee, turned back toward the door. "Go home, Renee. Get yourself together. When you're ready to have an actual conversation about what's best for Lila, a calm, rational conversation, call me. Until then, we need space." He went inside. Renee sat in her car for 20 minutes before driving away. She made it 3 blocks before pulling over, putting her head on the steering wheel, and crying until her throat was raw. That night she opened a beer, then another, then 3 more. She sat on the couch in the dark, drinking until the edges of her thoughts went soft and the pain became something distant, manageable. She woke up at 2 a.m., still on the couch, her neck cramped. The beer bottles sat on the coffee table, evidence of a breakdown she couldn't afford. She poured them down the sink, threw the bottles away, and sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper. She couldn't fight this with emotion. She couldn't fight it with arguments. She needed to fight it with documentation. She started making lists. Dates times incidents. Every blocked call. Every closed bank account. Every time Judith had overstepped and Evan had allowed it. Every way she'd been systematically pushed out of her own family. It took her all night. By sunrise, she had 12 pages of notes. It wasn't enough. Not yet, but it was a start. The thing about being systematically erased from your child's life is that people expect you to fight loudly, to make scenes, to prove you're unstable by acting exactly as desperate as you feel. Renee decided to do the opposite. She went back to work, picked up extra shifts, stopped calling Evan, stopped driving to Judith's house, stopped crying where anyone could see. She opened a new bank account in only her name, started rebuilding her savings $5 at a time. She found a legal aid clinic 40 minutes away that offered free consultations. The lawyer there, a tired woman named Patricia with gray roots and a kind smile, listened to Renee's story without interrupting. "You need a paper trail," Patricia said when Renee finished. "Document everything. Every text, every call, every incident. Get copies of all your financial records, showing the accounts were closed without your full consent. Get statements from your employer showing your work history, your reliability. Character references from anyone who knows you're a good mother. What about the police? Can I report? Report what? Patricia leaned back in her chair. Your husband taking your daughter to his mother's house? There's no custody order in place. You're married. He has just as much right to make decisions about her care as you do. Until you file for divorce or custody, this is technically a domestic issue, not a criminal one. So I'm just supposed to wait? While my daughter forgets who I am. No, you're supposed to build a case so strong that when you do go to court, there's no question about where Lila belongs. Patricia slid a packet of forms across the desk. Start here. Document everything for the next 6 months. Keep records. Be present in every way they'll allow. And whatever you do, don't give them ammunition to use against you. Renee took the forms home and filled them out at her kitchen table. Then she started rebuilding her life with the patience of someone placing stones for a foundation, one after another, slow and steady and permanent. She requested copies of Lila's medical records, found out Judith had taken her to a new pediatrician, one in Indianapolis, 40 miles away, without informing Renee. Judith had listed herself as the emergency contact. Evan was listed as the primary guardian. Renee's name appeared nowhere on the forms. She took photos of the paperwork, saved them to a cloud account Judith couldn't access. She drove to the daycare where Lila had been enrolled before everything fell apart, talked to the director, got written statements confirming Renee's regular attendance at pickup, her involvement in Lila's care, the suspicious nature of the blocked calls and absence reports. We should have called you directly, the director said, guilt evident in her voice. I'm sorry, we didn't realize something was wrong. You didn't know, Renee said, but now you do. If anyone contacts you about Lila, anyone other than me, I need you to document it. Can you do that? The director nodded. Renee added her written statement to the growing file in her car. She reached out to her supervisor at the warehouse, asked for a written employment history. He provided one showing 5 years of reliable work, minimal absences, several Employee of the Month awards. You in some kind of trouble? He asked, handing over the sealed envelope. I'm trying to get out of it, Renee said. She collected bank statements showing the pattern of her paychecks being deposited, then suddenly stopping. Showed how she'd had to convert to cash only. Built a timeline of financial control being stripped away. Every piece of evidence went into a folder. Every folder went into a fireproof box she kept hidden in her bedroom closet. And through it all, she waited. Judith's mistake came in March, 6 months after Lila had been taken. Renee only found out because she'd kept monitoring everything she could. Birth certificate records, medical files, anything public she could access without violating laws. She'd set up alerts, notifications, anything that might tell her what was happening with her daughter. The alert came through on a Thursday, school enrollment notification for Lila Rose Calder, registering for kindergarten prep at Brookside Academy, Indianapolis, Indiana. Renee's hands trembled as she clicked through the details. Brookside was an expensive private school. Enrollment required proof of guardianship. She called the school from her car during lunch break. I'm calling about my daughter, Lila Calder, she said, keeping her voice professional. I received a notification about her enrollment. Yes, Mrs. Calder, the registrar said cheerfully. We have her application here. Kindergarten prep starts in August. Is there something you need to update? Can you tell me who submitted the application? Let me check. It was Judith Calder, listed as legal guardian. Renee's pulse quickened. And what documentation did she provide for that guardianship? Paper rustled. I see a copy of the birth certificate and let me pull the file. Hold on. Renee waited, counting her heartbeats. Okay, so we have the birth certificate, immunization records, and a notarized letter stating Judith Calder has temporary guardianship due to the mother's health complications. More rustling. But actually looking at this, we still need the official court order. We can accept temporary arrangements for the application, but before enrollment is finalized, we need legal documentation. There is no court order, Renee said, because there's no legal guardianship. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, I'm not sure I understand. My mother-in-law does not have legal guardianship of my daughter. She's never had it. There's no court order because there's been no custody hearing. She's claiming guardianship without any legal authority. Oh, the word came out small, worried. Oh no, we can't proceed with enrollment without proper documentation. This is a huge problem. I need copies of everything she submitted, Renee said, especially that notarized letter. Can you send those to me? I'll have to check with my supervisor. Check, but understand that if my mother-in-law has committed fraud in her application, lying about having legal guardianship, your school has a legal obligation to report it. Yes, of course. I'll have someone call you back. Renee hung up and immediately called Patricia at Legal Aid. She claimed guardianship without a court order. Patricia sounded energized for the first time since they'd met. That's fraud. That's falsifying documents. That gives us exactly what we need. What do I do? You file for emergency custody. Today. Right now. Patricia was already typing. Renee could hear keys clicking. Come to my office. I'll have the paperwork ready. We're filing this afternoon, and we're requesting an immediate hearing. Renee left work early, drove to Patricia's office with her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The paperwork took 3 hours to complete. Every incident documented, every piece of evidence attached. By 5 p.m., they'd filed with the county courthouse. By 6 p.m., Evan was calling her phone nonstop. She didn't answer. She drove home, made dinner she couldn't eat, and waited. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Evan finally caught her at work on the third day, showing up at the warehouse during her afternoon break. What the hell is this? He shoved papers at her, his copy of her custody filing. You're accusing my mother of kidnapping. I'm petitioning for custody of our daughter. Renee didn't step back, didn't flinch. Which I shouldn't have to do, except you took her from me 6 months ago and refused to bring her home. She's been at Mom's because you were unstable. We were helping you. By closing our bank accounts, by blocking the daycare's calls, by telling the school your mother has legal guardianship when she doesn't. Renee's voice stayed level, calm. That's not help, Evan. That's theft. You're insane. Mom's going to prove that in court. She's already talked to her lawyer. Good. Tell her to bring documentation of her guardianship. The court will want to see it. Evan's face went red. You're going to regret this. You know that? Making this public. Making our family look bad. You're going to lose everything. I already lost everything. Renee picked up her work gloves, turned back toward the warehouse floor. Now I'm getting it back. He grabbed her arm. Don't walk away from me. Let go. Her voice was ice. He did, but his eyes were full of something dark, something that might have been hate. Mom's right about you. She's been right this whole time. Then she won't have any problem explaining it to a judge. Renee walked away and didn't look back. That night, Judith called. Renee answered on the second ring. I think we should talk, Judith said. Her voice was calm, controlled. As adults, we can work this out without courts and lawyers, Renee. For Lila's sake. There's nothing to work out. You don't have custody. You never did. I have temporary guardianship. Evan signed. Evan can't grant you guardianship without my consent. We're still married. We have equal parental rights. Renee had read enough legal documents in the past 6 months to know this cold. The only person who can grant guardianship is a judge, and you never bothered to go to court because you knew you'd lose. Silence stretched between them. I did what was best for my granddaughter, Judith finally said. You were falling apart. Someone had to step in. Someone did. Her father, who chose you over me. Renee closed her eyes. But that's not how the law works. And you know it. That's why you never filed for custody yourself. You thought you could just take her, and I'd be too broken to fight back. I thought you'd eventually see reason. I see it perfectly. Renee opened her eyes, stared at her empty kitchen. See you in court, Judith. She hung up before Judith could respond. The 2 weeks before the hearing crawled by. Renee couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. She ran through every possible outcome, every question the judge might ask, every way this could go wrong. Patricia coached her over the phone. Stay calm. Stick to facts. Don't let them make you emotional. Answer questions directly. Don't volunteer extra information. What if I lose? You won't. Not this round. At minimum, you'll get visitation. More likely, you'll get shared custody immediately and primary custody within 6 months. Patricia paused. The school enrollment was a gift, Renee. She overplayed her hand. That's her mistake, and it's going to cost her. The day of the hearing, Renee wore a simple navy dress she'd bought from a thrift store. Her hair pulled back neatly, minimal makeup. She looked like what she was, a working mother who'd been put through hell. Evan and Judith sat on the other side of the courtroom with their lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in an expensive suit. Judith wore pearls and a cream blazer. She looked composed, confident. She didn't look at Renee once. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and reading glasses. She reviewed the filed documents in silence for what felt like hours. This is a petition for custody in an intact marriage, she finally said, looking up at both sides. That's unusual. Why are we here, Ms. Winters? She directed this to Patricia. Patricia stood. Your Honor, my client's daughter was removed from her care 6 months ago without her consent and has been kept from her despite repeated attempts to establish regular contact. The child is currently enrolled in school, listing the paternal grandmother as legal guardian, despite no custody order or guardianship arrangement being in place. The judge turned to Judith's lawyer. Is that accurate? The lawyer stood. Your Honor, my clients removed the child from a harmful environment. The mother has exhibited signs of mental instability, financial irresponsibility, and... Is there a court order granting guardianship to Judith Calder? The judge interrupted. No, Your Honor, but... Is there any documentation, any psychiatric evaluation, any police report, anything official documenting this alleged instability? The lawyer hesitated. The family felt it was best to handle this privately. The family doesn't get to decide that. The judge removed her glasses, set them on the bench. You don't get to take someone's child without legal authority and call it handling things privately. That's not how custody works. She shuffled through more papers, her expression hardening. Where is the child now? She asked. With me, Your Honor. Judith spoke for the first time, her voice steady. She's been in my care for 6 months. She's happy, healthy, thriving. Her mother wasn't capable of providing the stability she needed. And you determined that how? I'm her grandmother. I know what's best for her. Are you a licensed social worker? A child psychologist? A family court mediator? No, but... Then you don't get to make that determination. The judge looked at Evan. Mr. Calder, did you remove your daughter from her mother's care? Evan stood. Yes, Your Honor. With my mother's help. My wife was struggling. We thought. Did your wife agree to this arrangement? No, but... Did you file for custody? For divorce? For legal separation? No. Then why did you think you had the right to unilaterally remove your daughter from her mother? Evan opened his mouth, closed it. I was trying to protect my daughter. From what, specifically? Can you provide evidence of abuse? Neglect? Substance abuse? Anything that would legally warrant removing a child from her mother? She was stressed, tired all the time. She wasn't herself. The judge looked at Renee. Ms. Calder, do you work full-time? Renee stood. Yes, Your Honor. At a warehouse. I've been there 5 years. Do you have a good employment record? Yes, Your Honor. Patricia handed up the employment documentation. The judge reviewed it briefly. And you want custody of your daughter? Yes, Your Honor. She's my daughter. I love her. I've been trying to see her for 6 months. The judge set down the papers, looked at each person in turn. Here's what's going to happen, she said. Effective immediately, Lila Calder will return to the shared custody of both parents. I'm establishing a temporary schedule, week on, week off alternating. All major decisions require both parents' consent. Neither parent may relocate the child without court approval. She looked at Judith. Mrs. Calder, you have no legal authority over this child. You will not enroll her in school, take her to medical appointments, or make any decisions regarding her care without the explicit consent of both parents. Is that clear? Judith's composure cracked for just a moment. Your Honor, I've been caring for her for 6 months without legal authority, which ends now. The judge looked at her lawyer. I strongly suggest your client not attempt anything like this again, or she'll be facing fraud charges. We're done here. I'll have the custody order drawn up by end of day. She banged her gavel. Renee sat down slowly, her legs shaking. Patricia squeezed her shoulder. You did it, Patricia whispered. You got her back. Across the courtroom, Judith sat frozen, her face pale. Evan was leaning close, speaking urgently to their lawyer, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Renee didn't feel triumphant. She felt exhausted, wrung out, empty. But underneath the exhaustion was something else, something that had been buried for 6 months. Hope. The exchange happened 3 days later at the courthouse. Neutral territory, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. Renee waited in a small conference room, her hands folded on the table, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. The door opened. Judith walked in first, holding Lila's hand. The little girl had grown. Her hair was longer, styled in a way Renee hadn't done before. She wore clothes Renee didn't recognize. She didn't immediately run to Renee. Hi, baby, Renee said softly, kneeling down to Lila's level. I've missed you so much. Lila looked at Judith, uncertain. It's okay, Judith said, her voice tight. You can go to your mother. Lila walked over slowly, cautiously, like Renee was a stranger. Renee's heart shattered, but she smiled, held out her arms, and waited. Lila came closer, touched Renee's face. Mama. Yeah, baby. It's Mama. And then Lila was in her arms, solid and warm and real, and Renee was crying, couldn't stop crying, didn't care who saw. I'm sorry, she whispered into Lila's hair. I'm so sorry, but you're coming home now. We're going home. Judith left without a word. The monitor gave them privacy for the rest of the hour. Renee sat on the floor with her daughter, relearning her laugh, her voice, the way she liked to stack blocks in patterns now instead of towers, learning about the person Lila had become in the 6 months they'd been apart. It wasn't what she'd lost, but it was what she could build from. The custody battle stretched on for 8 more months. Evan fought for primary custody, claiming Renee was vindictive, unstable, using Lila as a weapon. Judith testified, described Renee's behavior, her anger, her inability to provide proper care. But the court had documentation, employment records, character witnesses, medical records showing no history of mental illness, no substance abuse, nothing that warranted removing a child from her care. And they had the school enrollment fraud. That was the piece Judith couldn't explain away. In trying to secure permanent control, she documented her own overreach. The judge's final ruling came in November. Primary physical custody to Renee, with Evan receiving standard visitation. Judith's visitation would be supervised and limited to once per month. Mrs. Calder overstepped her authority in ways that demonstrate poor judgment and a concerning pattern of control, the judge stated in her written opinion. While her intentions may have been motivated by love for her granddaughter, her actions were legally inappropriate and emotionally harmful to both the child and the mother. Renee sat in the courtroom, listening to the words that officially gave her back her life. Evan cried, actually cried, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, whispered something Renee couldn't hear. Judith sat perfectly still, her expression blank. Outside the courthouse, Evan caught up with Renee in the parking lot. "I hope you're happy," he said. His eyes were red, his voice hoarse. "You destroyed our family." "No," Renee said, turning to face him. "Your mother did that, and you let her." "I was trying to help." "You were choosing her over me. Every single time." Renee's voice stayed steady, firm. "You could have stood up for me. For us. But you didn't. You let her take our daughter and then acted like I was crazy for wanting her back. I thought she was right. I thought you were falling apart. I was working. I was tired. I was trying to keep our family afloat while you and your mother decided I wasn't good enough." Renee shook her head. "I'm filing for divorce. The papers will be served next week." "Renee." "We're done, Evan. We've been done since the day you handed Lila over without asking me first." She got in her car and drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot, looking small and lost. She felt nothing for him anymore. Not love, not hate, just the vast indifference of someone who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side permanently changed. Renee and Lila moved away from Millstone Creek 3 months later. Not far, just 2 towns over, far enough that she didn't run into people who knew the story, who'd sided with Judith, who believed the narrative of Renee's instability. She found a new job at a different warehouse with better pay, enrolled Lila in a good daycare where Renee knew every teacher's name and received every phone call directly. She bought furniture from thrift stores, built a home piece by piece. It was smaller than the house she'd shared with Evan, but it was hers, completely, entirely hers. Evan saw Lila every other weekend. He was always on time for pickup and drop-off, always polite. They didn't speak beyond logistics. The divorce was finalized without contest. He didn't ask for the house, didn't fight about money. He just signed the papers and moved on. Or back, really. Back to his mother's house, where Renee suspected he'd always belonged more than he'd ever belonged with her. Judith tried calling once. Renee didn't answer. The supervised visitations became less frequent as Lila got older, until they stopped entirely. Judith sent birthday cards and Christmas presents that Renee accepted but didn't acknowledge. Some wounds were too deep for forgiveness. Some people didn't deserve it. 5 years passed. Lila was 7 now, in 2nd grade, thriving in a school where no one knew about the custody battle or the family that had tried to take her. She made friends easily, loved art class, brought home drawings she taped to the refrigerator. One evening, after dinner, she looked up from her homework and asked, "Mama, why doesn't Grandma Judith come to visit anymore?" Renee set down the dish she was washing. This was a conversation she'd known would come eventually, because when you were little, Grandma Judith did something that hurt me very badly, Renee said carefully. She took you away from me for a long time, and that's not something I can forget. Lila was quiet, processing. Did she do it because she didn't like you? No, she did it because she thought she knew better than me how to take care of you. Renee dried her hands, came to sit at the table. She loved you very much. She still does. But love isn't enough when someone doesn't respect boundaries. What's boundaries? It means knowing where one person ends and another person begins. It means not trying to control people, even if you love them. Renee tucked a strand of hair behind Lila's ear. Grandma Judith thought loving you gave her the right to make decisions about you that only I should make. And when I said no, she didn't listen. So you stopped letting her see me? No, a judge did that, because what she did was wrong, even if she thought it was right. Lila thought about this. Are you still sad about it? Sometimes, but mostly I'm just glad you're here with me. Renee smiled. And I'm glad I fought to get you back. Was it hard? The fighting? Very hard. The hardest thing I've ever done. Renee met her daughter's eyes. But you were worth it. You'll always be worth it. Lila nodded, seemed satisfied with this answer, and went back to her homework. Renee went back to the dishes, her hands moving through familiar motions, the kitchen warm with evening light. She'd never repaired the relationship with Judith, never found closure or resolution in any traditional sense. She'd simply moved forward, built a new life from the pieces of the old one, and refused to look back with anything other than hard-learned wisdom. She didn't forgive Judith. She didn't trust Evan. She didn't believe family ties were sacred when they were used as chains. She just believed in herself, in her daughter, in the life they'd built together from nothing but determination and time. And that, she'd learned, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.